My name is Jason Searle. I am a member of the Fitness, Health, and Wellness Committee. Amongst other things, our committee organizes health and wellness fairs and arranges lectures regarding issues regarding our health. We aim to have lectures bi-monthly or more frequently during the winter and spring season. Upcoming events include a healthy cooking contest in which 6 River Strand resident chefs will prepare a dish for our attendees to taste, along with its recipe and an explanation of why they think it's a healthy choice. Attendees will then vote on which is their favorite healthy offering. The contest will be held during the craft fair on December 6th right here in the Sanctuary Clubhouse and around the pool. I invite you all to attend, and we're hoping to perhaps even have winning recipes be made by the chef during the winter season here. On December 12th, our own Dr. Andrea Adler will be teach us about auditory processing disorders. In February, we'll have our 2nd annual River Strand Fitness Scavenger Hunt, where we will challenge teams to work together to locate items all around the River Strand community and complete other fitness tasks in an energetic 90-minute foray. In addition to announcements in the River Strand monthly email update and weekly newsletter, information can be found on the Members Central Committee's Health and Wellness site. Here's our current page with accessible information from recent lectures, including Glenn Orser regarding ergonomics and injuries, and our own Stanley Knockamson on Medicare 2025 enrollment choices, issues and changes. These are our PowerPoint presentations. We also have a walking club that we started last year that we'll have again this year, a walking club in which you'll be invited here to sign up for groups that you might want to walk with. You'll arrange your own walking. Last year we attempted to have a challenge of who would walk the most steps over the season. We never quite got to that stage, but we hope to set it up for this year. So watch for that. In addition to our listing here, including our fitness calendar, we also have a River Strand YouTube channel for our lectures, cleverly entitled at River Strand Fitness Committee, in which most of the recorded lectures over the past 18 months and ongoing we have and available for review, including things balance and injury recovery, rheumatological problems, water in our life, cancer, navigating a cancer diagnosis. Please check Member Central for a list of upcoming events. And today, we'll be treated by a lecture by one not our own, Andre Gachter. Some of you, like me, may have seen Andre's fabulous post on Nextdoor entitled This Day in American History, in which Andre eloquently brings to life significant events in our country's history. I was so impressed by his offering that I asked him to prepare a lecture for our committee, and he proposed today's topic: Florida's indigenous tribes, lifestyle, and health. Besides being erudite, he apparently also is modest. When I asked him how he'd like to be introduced, he said, quote, "Just introduce me as a neighbor who likes history. He came up with an idea that combines both topics that will hopefully be interest of all." Based on what I've read of his offerings, I'm sure we'll enjoy this talk. Andre, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason, for the invitation. So just by way of my background, I live in the Inlets Harbor Walk, so just down the road. We moved there in 2018, but it wasn't my first foray into Florida. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, went to high school in Coral Springs. Left military, came back, after college, took a job in Miami, left, was offered a job by Tropicana in Bradenton, but turned that down, went someplace else instead. So this is my 3rd venture back into Florida. It's as close to home as I have. So yeah, the intent here was to kind of bring something in that I thought would be maybe interesting to folks, to kind of learn about who was here before us and how did they live. Because they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have healthcare facilities, they didn't have a lot of the things that we just assume we have. And so I said, let's talk about the people that were here first, right? That somehow figured out Florida was their destination when they came across from the Bering Straits and meandered all the way down over 10,000 years ago into this peninsula. So let's see if this is correct here. So I was going to give you a little bit of overview about the Native Americans, kind of their lifestyle, their health, and kind of a conclusion. Because we live with a lot of data, some of it's correct, some of it's incorrect, some of it's incomplete. But they clearly had their own approach to life. You know, they came here and did what most people did back then. If you could make a living here, i.e. find enough to food and hunger and all that stuff, you would stay here, right? That became your home. So if you look at this, you see basically the timeline's pretty long, right? I mean, 12,000 years ago is when they first kind of came into the area. And there's a couple other slides you're gonna find interesting because you're gonna see some names that are gonna ring a bell and say, oh, that's the name of a city or village or something that I've driven by. But basically, they all came over when the Ice Age, they came across the Bering Strait, and they just kept on progressively moving further south until, like the folks in Key West, they can't go any further south, so they never leave. So, you know, they can end up in Key West. It's the bottom of the funnel there. But basically, that was the whole premise. And then they didn't have experience or exposure to any other people until this guy showed up from Scandinavia, Leif Erikson. And he was the first Viking, supposedly came on the northeasterly side of the US. And that's when they first started being introduced to other cultures and other than what they knew. But there was a lot of things that people don't realize also. They always think it was when the conquistadors came and all that it introduced, which it also did, health and bacteria and things that they didn't have basically protection against. But they actually started declining quite before that. And so it wasn't just because of health issues or infectious diseases or things like that that caused the population to decline. And they also progressed as a society. They went from hunter-gatherers to kind of more into these agricultural societies. And they actually had fairly large cities down here in Florida, similar to the Incas, the Aztecs in South America. So these are things that a lot of people don't even realize about the breadth and the influence that they had in the community. And then, of course, we all know this guy. He started the European quest into the Americas because of the riches that they were all after. That's all it was about, is there gold? Is there something of value that I care about? And if you even look today on top of the state capitol building, you see Virginia. She's the tobacco symbol, which was the first prosperous crop that allowed us to populate the US from Europe, because they failed several other attempts, right? So tobacco was the first indicator that said, hey, we can make a living here in this new colony here, even though there's not a lot of gold or things that we thought we'd find. So that's just kind of a timeline as to when it started, how long they've been here, these tribes, or their roots for the tribes, and kind of some of the factors that influenced them as they came along.
Pardon my ignorance, but what does CE stand for?
Common era.
Do what?
Common
Yeah, there's
era.
different interpretations. You got AD and CE. So depending on where I grabbed the source, I didn't try and rectify it or change it. I just grabbed the source and said, I'm gonna use that.
BCE is before Common Era.
Correct.
That's right.
Is that better? I didn't even ask if you're, can you hear me well enough?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
no.
Thank you.
So again, here another, this is Florida specific, right? 12,000 years ago. Paleo Indians, and basically Paleo is all those tribes that basically were hunter-gatherers and had very rudimentary skills and tools. and lifestyle habits, nothing even compared to what the tribes today have. And then you see the things that start influencing the populations, right? You had ice ages ending and warming up, and you're actually going to learn, for example, that Florida's size was twice the size when the natives were here than it is today. So when they were in Pensacola, that was not beachfront property back then. That was in the middle of nowhere. and it wasn't close to where, that's why when you, I don't know, any fishermen here? If there's not, you know that on the Atlantic side, you drop off the shelf very quickly, a mile and a half, half a mile. Here you go 10, 20, 30, 40 miles out before you get into deep, deep water. So that's why you're gonna spend most of your day running your boat out to get to the fishing site versus fishing when you're on the West Coast. So again, the evolution of Florida itself means that it was a gradual evolution of the tribes and what they did, how they did it, where they did it. That there were things that impacted their health and lifestyle that had to do with the changing of the climate. Nothing to do with man-made stuff. It was just the ice age was ending at that time. And then they started developing skills going beyond the hunter-gatherer, where they started creating bowls and pottery and things like that that they could use for day-to-day life, which then also impacted their ability to be healthier, survive longer. All these evolutionary steps kind of took them to the next level as far as their lifestyle. So if there's no, I'm not trying to read this whole thing to you, just want to give you an overview of the information. And so, you know, what did these tribes do, right? You've got Belle Glade area, incredible amounts of fossils that you never even hear about these things, right? We just drive by it, build on it, have a new Publix, you know? And don't even think about where this country was or this land was before that. Yeah, so I think we'll just go. So like I said, they traveled south, and now on this one. So a lot of what we've learned about these native tribes happened because of things that we were doing in the state, like when the Army Corps of Engineers lowered the water levels around Lake Okeechobee, and that's when they found some of these artifacts. They were just hidden several feet underwater. Nobody even knew about this, and they started exploring all this stuff. So they started learning, hey, there's a lot of stuff here.
Is there a museum anywhere in Florida that has these artifacts?
Oh, there are lots of places to look. I'll have to get back to you with a list.
I'm just curious.
There are a lot of places that have the artifacts. The state of Florida has a lot of artifacts. The university systems have a lot of artifacts. Like this Belle Glade culture artifact here, it just showed you they're really starting to get into you know, crafting things and having belief systems and doing things around that.
What's the material they're building with?
Mainly clay.
Clay?
Clays, yeah. Yeah, when they lowered the water, it was traditionally about 20 feet, and they got it down to about 8.8 feet, and that's when they started finding a lot of this information here and exploring all this. So it was by virtue of our development that enabled us to actually come across something we didn't even know existed. So there's always a silver lining to this stuff. So yeah, this was 2,700 years ago, so way before Columbus even showed up here, where these cultures were. And they actually started establishing fairly strong infrastructure with canal systems, boating to get to and from. They started building all these mounds that helped them again, establish more city-like look and feel. Yeah, it's just quite amazing that these were these prehistoric nomads that kind of came down here and started evolving with nothing else but their intellect and the things that they had available to them, the resources. So we'll go to the next one here. And this is a slide that I liked a lot because here's where you see some of the things that I was talking about. You see Pensacola. You see Tequesta, that's just north of West Palm Beach, right? That's the village of Tequesta. And we don't put two and two together and say, you know, what's the origin of this name, or, you know, why is it something that we maintained or evolved here? Now, the Calusa were the folks that were very close to our region, right? And all of these tribes, if you want to boil it down, have become Seminole, Miccosukee. They've all kind of grown into those major tribes that you know today. So that's why you don't hear those names anymore. It's because they kind of, they had their own warfare and their own attacks on each other. So they would take each other's slaves and all kinds of stuff like that, which is one of the reasons they had a longevity issue sometimes, because they did wage war on each other. And this, again, way before any Europeans showed up in here.
Why were they waging war? Were they competing for territory mostly, you know? Or?
I think it goes down to the core of human beings.
Okay.
Power, control. I'm gonna take something away from you that I want, you know, so I think it was that simple. They were not immune to those behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit about the colonizers. Interesting guy, spent a lot of time in Florida without realizing that he was gonna set a precedent. I mean, the fountain of youth. I think we're still looking for that, or some people are. I think my wife is, I don't know. But yeah, he brought a lot of perspective to what this potential was here, right? And I don't know if you guys ever meander out to places, some of the parks around here with the walking trails, and you kind of see how thick and rugged it was in there. It's like these guys didn't think anything of it. They just dropped their anchor, came ashore, and started wading through it. And so were the Native Americans, right? That was their home. They didn't think anything of it. But they're pretty rugged individuals, not very sophisticated, not very nice sometimes, but pretty rugged individuals. But what did they bring to the, here's another one here, lockup. These folks were all exploring for their crowns, mainly for Spain, Portugal. And they were looking for wealth, right? They were looking for gold, the treasures, all the things that people thought were in these lands. And in Latin South America, that was true. There was a lot of gold that they were coming across there. But I mean, these people literally had no SOS, no 911. They came over here in their ship, and if it made it, then they got this far. If they got stranded, I mean, this guy made it first to Florida and then somehow made it all the way to Texas. A long journey, right? So, I mean, these guys explored and opened up the eyes and ears of the world that, hey, there's a possibility that you could come here and maybe find something of value or grow your colonial power or whatever it was at the time. And this just shows his journey. I mean, this wasn't like a Carnival cruise in a week. This was a Spanish cruise that took years, right? They would go from all these places that they didn't even know properly what they were, and make their way across the country. And I mean, if you see all the way up there, how far northwest they went, it's incredible what these people did with so little to explore and understand what's there. But it was because of this type of stuff that they started drawing maps and started providing guidance about this, that, and the other, that then opened the door for others to do it later on. So here's, again, the evolution of the tribes, of the indigenous people, you know, from a lifestyle, they went from hunter-gatherers. We had, I don't know if you knew this, we had mammoths here in Florida. All kinds of critters that you can't even fathom that we had here. So that's what they went after, the food source. Florida, because of the weather, was more mild compared to northerly climates with the cold and temperate regions. We have these little hurricane storms and things, but there's not a lot of data back then about how that impacted these folks, if they were occasionally being subjected to harsh weather conditions like that. But they did evolve into the agriculture societies, and again, with that, they started having predictable food sources, which meant when you had infants and children, the mothers were able to feed them because they were healthier, they were better nourished. And so the life age change from that era to this era was significant, just because all of a sudden the food source was more stable. And agriculture, they weren't really into dairy too much, which was the single biggest driver for growth and bone structure and bone density and bone health. That's why if you go to Africa, you see two different top tribes and say, oh, that's a different tribe. DNA-wise, they were 100% matched, but the one source has incredible amounts of dairy in their diet, the other one didn't. So the pygmies are little, the bush people, and the others are much larger, right? So the bone density and the size of their physical structure was impacted by the type of diet that they had. Just like that. Go ahead.
You show agriculture there. What about fishing? Was that part of their?
Definitely. The coastal regions, but again, just remember that given the size of how much larger it was, Florida, if you were not on the coastal edge, you were not benefiting from the fish. But like I said, the people who lived in today's St. Petersburg did not have access to saltwater fish and any of that. And then they really, just west of us is where they started building these larger cities. And that included in all kinds of trade and commerce and all kinds of, if you want to talk about why they were attacking each other, these guys said, hey, we need more stuff, and they would go out and take somebody else's stuff, right? So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the lifestyle here again, the tribal warfare. So I've got to change my pages here. Yeah, they talk about drought, famine, other natural disasters posed a threat to survival, especially for the societies once they got into this agro economy. So if it disrupted that cycle, that they lost a harvest or a crop, that significantly impacted them because of that. If it got flooded out or there was a whole bunch of damage because of that, then they lost their food source. But yeah, they every time they've been digging and they've looked at the fragments of skeletal remains, they investigate and say, you know, do I see anything, detect anything in there that would indicate that they've been subjected to any violent trauma? And so that's how they get a lot of that information about the warring factions and how they in fact did do not so nice things to each other at times. And then again, we talk about the environmental factors. Back then it was strictly based on the global shift and change, the warming of the planet. So you basically started getting more and more water. You had less and less of certain attributes that maybe have been beneficial for agriculture or whatever they're doing. So all these factors impacted their lifestyle and health. Once you got dependent on a certain way of life, if that was disrupted, that impacted your lifestyle. But the number one item that impacted the average age of indigenous people was incredibly high infant mortality rates. They literally had no treatment. You know, that child either came out relatively healthy, unscathed, or it did not. And then if you had famine conditions or other conditions going on, and that mother couldn't nurse that child, then yeah, infant mortality was extremely high. To the point, and there's a chart that I'll have in here shortly, is that you could say the average life age of an Indigenous person was in their 30s if you factored in the infant mortality. But once they got beyond that, then they could live to be 50 or 60 years old. So it was trying to overcome that hump as an infant or child to get through that. The Calusa we talked about before, they lived just 30 miles north of Fort Myers. That was kind of their epicenter. That's where you saw those big structures and cities that they were building, the mounds. In Everglades, have you been to Everglades City? There are a lot of Indian oyster shell bed built islands down there that they built for themselves as part of living in that. I don't know if you've been familiar with that. Well, you were, but anybody else? It's the 10,000 island kind of place, right? The only thing that is more successful there than anything else are mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are fierce down there. I drove up there, or down there, I should say, and I said, they talk about the mosquitoes, and we put the car in park, and boom, all over the glass windshield on the car. Mosquitoes were covering. I said, let me in there. I'm going, oh, man. So this is the chart that kind of talks a little bit about the lifespan mortality rates. So as you see, it was fairly high. And this is, you know, Florida, kind of northeast Florida population. So there's not incredibly detailed information about every region, every tribe. So you really have to go looking for it. But you see a sharp decline does coincide a little bit with the colonization by the Spanish, right? But they had other things going on there. But it really declined when the whole reservation structure came in place, the Indian Wars happened, all those things. And when they got migrated and resettled and everything, that really impacted them tremendously. And that's when you also started forging all these tribes into these 3 or 4 main tribes of Florida, right? They just kind of had no place else to go. There'd be one left from one tribe, so they would just join another tribe. So it did have a fairly significant impact. And again, just bear in mind, this is northeast Florida, but I think it's representative of what you would have seen or had happened. Again, my only data point, I don't like using just one data point, but that's all I had. And then we'll talk a little about this again. Like I talked about before, you know, the land area was twice that what it is today. Was 50 miles away from the shoreline, right? So when the native Paladonians were here, that was a 50-mile trek to get to the ocean when you were talking about taking advantage of eating fish and shellfish and things like that. But they did do it, and because of that, that was one of the healthier regions for the Native Americans, the people that lived on the coastal side. So as you see, there's just incredible amounts of stuff out there that people don't even realize every day. Bless you.
Thank you.
And it's all over Florida. You just don't realize it when you're driving that there was a native or indigenous component to civilization in that area. And so like what you see there in just north of us, they only became aware of this is when they were trying to expand and build more picnic facilities. They started digging and said, oh, look at all these artifacts here. So there's incredible amounts of history here. And each time they do that, they find information about the lifestyle, health, what they were doing, you know, as far as the crafts and trades that they were promoting and working on. And so it's quite interesting that it's just everywhere. You just don't realize it. I think when I lived with my wife in Illinois, we would go back in our property along the creek and find the arrowheads. I mean, just, it's always interesting. So is that getting that down? There we go. So I gave you, you talked about a cooking symposium you're gonna have, right? Here's a recipe you guys could adapt for that cooking symposium, but something that they would have made out of the local ingredients here, the swamp cabbage. And they had all these ingredients, you know, water, the part of the cabbage pond, some cane syrup or sugar and salt. And you should try this. I haven't tried it. You should try it.
You go first.
So I mean, there's all kinds of things you can experiment and find out. So this was their diet. I mean, it wasn't too exciting. It wasn't like going to, what's that, Miller's Ale House or any of those places. What happened to them? So here's the 3 tribes that we've ended up with here in Florida. Everything else has blended into these. So there's no one group that only went into one or another. These were the powerhouse tribes. And the Seminole were the ones that said, we're not gonna take it anymore. And they fought against Andrew Jackson. They did all those things. They were sent, part of them, to reservations way, way far away. Some stayed here. The Miccosukee tribes, that's the biggest aggregation of tribes, if you want to call it. They brought in the most of it. And each of these today has their own, how should I put this, way of making money. And part of it comes, the biggest part of it comes from the casino investments that they were able to gain from giving up some of the land that they had, right? So they made a deal. We're gonna keep some of this land, we're gonna get all the casinos, and we're gonna dole out fairly significant amounts of money to each tribal member today. I think it's, I don't know, I wanna say it's like $8,000–9,000 a year to each member of the tribe. Gets from the casino revenues.
What's the poverty level of the tribes? You know, we don't see much about the Florida tribes. We certainly see about the western tribes and poverty and drugs and all of that. What's the lifestyle
Today.
today?
The lifestyle today, like I said, they're relatively well off. And I don't know in whose relative terms, they'll always say we should get more. But these tribes here in Florida, because of the casino royalty, get that payout. They have all these services provided to them. They've got their own hospitals and healthcare and doctors on site at the different tribes and locations that they have. So they get they get all that kind of care for free. They don't pay for those things. Is it a lifestyle that you can look back on and feel good about? I'm not in their shoes. I can't speak to that.
How about reservations and land that's theirs? Obviously, for the casinos, they have to have that, but do they have large living areas that are dedicated?
Have you gone to Billy Bob's Swamp Ride on
No.
Alligator Alley?
No.
Yeah, they've got a little bit of ecotourism, but it's predominantly the casino revenue that drives whatever wealth they have. Just like in other parts of the country, they get oil revenue, they get resource revenue from different lands that they were part of, that they gave up. Or, go ahead.
I'm gonna interrupt, but was it the Seminoles who were driven off into Oklahoma reservations and that story, the Trail of Tears, something like that?
They would be lumped into the overall Cherokee Nation, and they were all part of a massive push to put them into those reservations, yes, that's correct. And that was Andrew Jackson, who came into Florida and fought against the Seminoles. So, I mean, if there's one thing we learned is after the Civil War, in order for the Civil War not to reignite, for example, Grant said, open up the West. And that caused massive investment in railroad investments. There's all kinds of fly-by-nights and, hey, I'll do a railroad and take your money, and then they ran. But then what that also did is exactly that. It basically squeezed out those indigenous tribes from those regions because whatever land they had was taken away from them. So that was Grant's compromise. He goes, I don't want to restart the Civil War because it was a powder keg right after it ended, that they weren't ready to quit yet. And he said, the only way I'm going to do that is to give all these people access to their own land, which was, I'm going to take it away from somebody else. So it was a vast compromise that was made. You know, I don't know if it's the right one, but at least it didn't start the war again. Maybe that's the saving grace for that.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Right now, there are no reservations in Florida
There are.
where they live and
Yeah.
school and,
Yeah. If you drive across 70 to the Atlantic side,
mhm.
there's a big reservation right there, about halfway, just before Okeechobee.
Oh, really?
And then, like I said, if you go on Alligator Alley, I-70, 75, you'll see that the Seminoles have a big chunk of land there also. And I grew up in Coral Springs, which is in Broward County. And then Coconut Creek is where there's a casino now. And I'm going, I did not know that was an Indian tribal region, but somehow they got that land and put a casino there, and they run it there in Coconut Creek, Florida. So
And they live in the area around it and work there, or?
So the people that run the casinos are typically living in the reservations. You know, that's, they don't pay tax on cigarettes or gas, they got all kinds of benefits like that by doing that. So it's a whole different, I don't think we, as non-Native Americans, indigenous people, whatever, can even come close to appreciating what that lifestyle has been like, what that history is like, what it's like every other tribe or ethnic region or group that has their challenges and questions and grievances.
I know in Alaska, I can't remember, it's either 7 or 9 tribes, but each tribe is trying to bring back the languages, the traditions, the culture, the music, things like that.
Yeah.
Is that similar thing going on in Florida amongst them? Is there's no pride in their heritage?
I don't want to say there's no pride, but
no
I think
action on it.
I think they probably lost that connection to that ethnic or heritage, if you want to call it. Not completely. I mean, if you go to the reservations, you'll still see people dressed in what I would call more traditional attire. I'm not saying running around naked or anything like that, but more representative of their particular tribe or their group of people. Did you have a question, Jason?
No, I actually had a comment, but I didn't want to interrupt where you are.
No, I was just going to kind of finish up with the key things that they struggled with health-wise.
Please.
And then, take whatever other questions you've got. So TB was a big factor for the folks here. Again, no treatment, and given their close proximity and limited understanding of hygiene practices and things like that. TB, and that was identified through DNA analysis of skeletal remains that they brought out. Then I'm going to get this wrong, treponematoid diseases, including syphilis, came largely after contact with the European settlers. So those kind of things were unknown to them prior to the Europeans settlers coming. Then incredible amounts of parasites. And again, this is again not understanding basic hygiene requirements, so not using the water upstream for cleaning yourself and then using it downstream to cook. Those practices were not thought about at that time. And then sepsis and other bacterial infections, they had absolutely no treatment for things like that. No way of dealing. There was no medicinal things, compounds they could make themselves to treat those ailments. They had no knowledge, no science, no understanding of the human body when it came to things like that. So,
Jared Diamond, who wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, is a anthropologist who looks at the different societies of the world and how they interacted and one became another. He talks about a couple of things that are interesting. One is that the natives of Central and South America, and I guess Florida too, the biggest killer was not the weapons that the Spanish had, but smallpox.
correct.
I forgot what it was. A third or a half of their population was killed by smallpox that was brought by the Spanish invaders who had exposure to it themselves, so they were more immune to it. And the second thing was that diseases you get immune to some diseases by interaction of different peoples. In Europe, the main corridor, the main axis is horizontal, east-west. So people from Russia could come over to Germany and expose each other. They're the same foods. But in the Americas, it's north and south. And you couldn't grow the same foods in Wisconsin as you can in Argentina or Central America. And so those people stayed separate, and when they did interact, that led to diseases that were widespread.
Right. Yeah, they were definitely susceptible to all the things you would be if you got in an elevator with somebody with COVID or something, That proximity would cause you to get that contagion. I do actually have the Seminole tribe that they receive a monthly dividend, about $7,000 per person per month, or $84,000 a year. They have their dedicated healthcare services exclusively to them. And today, and this is where there's no real good data. You'll see certain publications saying there were hundreds of millions of Native Americans here. There never was. But somehow people come up with these data points and use them, so it's really difficult to say what accurately was our position. Go ahead.
In 1979, I did my nursing public health at the Seminole Reservation.
Oh,
They were living in chickpea huts, no water, no sanitation.
and what year was this?
79.
Yeah, I believe that.
Before the casinos.
The casino boom,
And diabetes,
Oh, yeah.
heart problems, blood pressure.
Obesity was rampant.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, they lived a horrible life.
Yeah.
So whatever they get, good for them.
No,
Yeah.
all for it. I think we're a young country still, relatively speaking, because whenever I go to Europe or Africa or Middle East or Asia, and I see how old those civilizations have been and how long they've evolved, we should try and protect anything we can that is unique to us here, right? Because it is part of the DNA fabric of this country, right? We got a whole conglomerate of people and backgrounds, education, knowledge, skills, capabilities. So I do think that's a good thing. I was in the military with a couple of Native Americans, albeit from Michigan, not from down here, and boy, that guy could run. Big barrel chested guy, he could run like nothing else.
Jim Thorpe.
Yeah, he could have been. But but he came from a tribe reservation Upper Peninsula in Michigan and showed me the pictures of the snow. It was as high as this roof, and you just had a little slit to get to the cabins that they had in the wintertime. So everybody had their dynamics, but that was his home, you know, so. I don't know how he got in the Marine Corps, but he did.
You had mentioned before, I may have missed it, when you talk about the transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculture.
Correct.
I think you said 2,700. Was that 2,700 years ago or 2,700 BC?
2,700 years ago. So the tribes we talk about who did, they grew things like squash and maize, and that was more of a, what I would call north of Orlando into the Georgias, Carolinas, where they were able to kind of farm like that. Down here, there was very limited farming that they got into.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was a transition, and again, just like they flowed from the Bering, across the Bering Strait, all the way down to the tip of Florida, these things, ideations, innovations they brought, they got that because they were crossing paths with each other, right? They were trading, they were doing things when they were not fighting each other. So they learned things and brought things and tried it, and what worked, they, just like Virginia on top of the state capitol, right? Tobacco was our foundation crop that allowed us to grow a nation, right? Without tobacco, there would be no America. So it's a very interesting evolution all the way across for every society.
Were these people that came across the Bering Strait typically, were they European, Mesopotamian origin versus African origin, or?
No. So the people that came from Bering Strait, they had a very high, what I would call more Asian influence, right? So there were no countries, right? Way back when you just walked and went wherever you could, right? So you would say a lot of the people that came across more with that kind of background, right? They were more of they were not what I would call European, white-skinned, blue-eyed kind of people, right? They're more indigenous for those areas. And even if you go into Russia today and Siberia and stuff, you'll see the huge impact of the Asian, Slavic influence on their societies. So that was pretty much my overview. There really is very little data, if you want to call it, about the true health and well-being of people here. And you have to kind of pick it out based on these different things I looked at and said, well, what did they eat? Did they have access to medical herbs? You know, did they have witch doctors? What did they have?
You know, do they still have shamans?
So that is more of a, if I want to call it, comes from the Caribbean, Africa, comes from New Orleans, the Louisiana area, that kind of, like when I lived in South Carolina, you'd have these shaman type people that would do more of the witch doctor kind of notion of what people hear about, right? With the bones and the feathers and reading the leaves and things like that. They did not do that. They were, if you were talking about spiritual, they were more about the sun. The sun was what to them was the power that gave life. So that's what they focused on from a spiritual perspective.
They had when there was this mass push, they pushed the Native Americans out. Today, some of these reservations are returning to their original foods. Foods that
just
they
like we
ate
heard about their languages and
thousands of years ago, like, you know, before they were driven out and put into, you know, eating our kind of food. And they found that when that happened, there started to be this increase in heart disease, diabetes, obesity.
Yeah.
And so they're finding if they go back, you know, to what their ancestors were eating, growing those foods, they're getting healthier.
yeah.
Because their bodies never quite adjusted to the foods we were eating. And it sort of coincides, this gentleman said, was today, you know, 100 years ago, we were eating foods, real foods, and in the past 50 years, it's more processed. And what are we seeing? We're diabetes, heart disease, obesity. So, you know, because we've gotten away from the foods that maybe our ancestors ate for several hundred years.
Well, we talk about paleo diets, right? Which is you're focusing on core proteins and things like that in your diet versus all the processed food, which was, I don't know if you watch the History Channel, you'll see a series about the foods that built America, you know, and you'll see all these guys that innovated because the growth population for the country was surging, and there was no quick way of giving bread to everybody, right? You couldn't bake in a traditional manner. So everybody started innovating, looking for better ways to produce more food for more people. So we kind of hurt ourselves by growing so fast that we try to innovate. How do we feed that versus is that the right way to feed people? Yeah. Is this of interest to kind of?
Oh,
Yes.
Is there gonna be a test on this?
Do what now?
It's not going to be on the test.
You can't leave the room until you pass the test.
I may be here.
No, I think this is to take a whole different spin on the things maybe that you think about day in, day out as, to your point, you know, the diet that you consume today, is that really the best way to go about it? I don't know if I want the swamp cabbage.
Oh, no, in Lavelle, every year, around February, they have a swamp cabbage festival.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Also, they have pumpkin bread and all kinds of very.
I'm sure. I'll make my Irish stew with regular cabbage.
Your comment about foods that we eat and what the health implications are is a great one. In fact, I've lectured several times for our group. I'm a retired physician. I'm going to be doing one in February on vaccines. But I think maybe also an issue of food and nutrition might be a good talk too. One of the things you have to be careful about is the same time that our foods changed, it also became more plentiful and cheap.
Yeah.
And so part of our diabetes, our metabolic syndrome, may be that we're eating too much, not just that we're eating different foods. But that's to be seen.
It's a journey, right? I mean, you gotta figure it out, and, because if you don't, it'll get a hold of you in a negative manner, so.
But what were they eating, the Indians that were here, the indigenous people that were here, that lived in this area? What were they eating? What was their diet?
So they hunted and foraged.
And they hunted for,
Well, you had
Probably
deer, you had
alligator.
bear, you had all kinds of, you had rabbits, you had all kinds of mammals that they went after. They did fish if they were in proximity close to them, and then they would leverage the land. If those palmetto palms, they'd say, well, I can't eat the trunk, but maybe if I chop out the middle, that's something I can cook up and stew up. And,
There's a museum south on 41 called Spanish Point.
okay.
But go there, check to see when the docent is gonna be there.
Okay.
Because otherwise, you're just taking a walk in the woods.
Yeah.
But the docent's gonna take you from like 5,000 years ago
Oh, that's
up
fantastic.
until now. It's quite a place. They've got a midden mound.
Maybe you guys do an outing where you do some things like that to go
They
check
have
out
they have a midden mound. It's cut in half with a sheet of
plexiglass.
and it shows like 5,000 years old.
Oh, yeah,
You can see
yeah.
the different levels.
No, it's fascinating. I think you need to get out and go check it all out, you know?
When I was here for survival training with the Navy,
Yeah.
we went out, we ate palmetto, we ate lizards.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever we could catch, and yeah.
Yeah, I did that survival stuff in the Philippines. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Have you done any DNA testing with other Mesoamerican societies?
Well, the reason I'm able to tell this story is because of the DNA they did. They were able to trace the DNA from these people all the way to the people being
no, I've not been there.
So that's the majority of this information that comes from that kind of science.
Because you showed that art, and that art looks very similar to what you see in other Mesoamerican
Oh, yeah.
society. It's kind of weird, even though they live thousands of miles away, maybe they did share stuff we don't know. Probably more than what we think.
I'd like to thank Andre for an absolute wonderful talk. Maybe we can convince him to come back for another one later in the season.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.